Hi, and welcome to How to Adapt a Toy. This is part 2 of the module, and we are going to discuss how to solder. To start, my name is Kate Moseley, and I'm an AT specialist. I am a Tasc employee that contracts with STAR to provide AT webinars and trainings. You can view these trainings and webinars at www.startraining.org. This PowerPoint will be available if you so need it. You can email me at task@ucphuntsville.org to request the PowerPoint or for any questions that you might have. Just a quick bit about Tasc and STAR before we get started. Tasc stands for Technology Assistance for Special Consumers. We do AT consultations, informal sessions, and technical assistance. STAR is Alabama's assistive technology resource. Together, Tasc and STAR partner to provide you with AT for All, which is the lending library where you can check out equipment for 2 to 3 weeks. In this library are switches, mounts, adaptive toys, communication aids, aids to daily living, and computer access tools. So this is an overview of the entire module. Video 1 went over the introduction on adapting toys. This is video 2, how to solder. Video 3 is going to be about making ports, and video 4 is actually adapting the toy with all the parts. So in this specific video, we are going to talk about the tools needed to solder and the basics of soldering, as well as how to solder. Now let's talk about the tools you will need to solder. To start, you are going to need a soldering iron, like this yellow one here in the upper left corner. You will also need flux. Flux comes in these little tins and is a gel-like substance. You will need solder, which can come in 2 forms. It can come in a spool form, like the one shown here, or in a wrapped around like this one here. I much prefer this one just because it keeps it in a nice little spool that's easy to take little bits out at a time, but it is to preference and they do the same thing. You will also need a soldering iron stand. This is your standard soldering iron stand. You simply put the iron in the black piece here and it holds the iron while you're doing something else. You can also use this sponge to keep your soldering iron clean. I prefer a soldering iron stand similar to this one. Here we have the actual stand to hold the iron when it's not in use, but these clamps are useful for holding wires when you're soldering. So what exactly is happening when we solder? Solder is similar to liquid conductive tape, at least that's how I describe it. You're connecting wires together with solder and allowing electricity to flow. So the solder, when heated, will turn into liquid and keep whatever you put on it conductive to electricity while holding it together. Flux, that gel we had talked about earlier, is very useful in soldering because wherever you put flux, the solder will go. When flux melts, it creates a vacuum which draws the solder in to wherever you put it. So the steps we are going to take, we are going to prepare our station. So we want to make sure that we're doing this on a mat or a surface where if solder drips on it, it's not going to be a big deal. I sometimes will lay rags, or I have a plastic cutting mat that I like to use. Next, we're going to set up our wire. So when you buy wire, it usually comes in a protective coating. That means it's going to have plastic around it, which we don't want to solder. We'll need to strip the wire and make sure that we're able to see the metal. We're going to heat up our iron, so make sure it's plugged in and in its stand so that it can get hot enough to melt the solder. And then we are going to prep our wire. So now I'm going to demo how to solder. If you have any questions about this video, please email me at task@ucphuntsville.org. So now I'm going to demo how to solder. To start, I have all my tools here. I have the object that I'm going to solder. This is just a simple wire. I have my wire strippers, which I'm going to show you how to separate the middle part of the wire from the plastic covering. I have my flux and my solder. It comes in a little spool similar to this one. And then I have my stand where I'm going to hold the wire with this little clamp and the soldering iron. So to go ahead and get started, I'm going to strip my wire by placing it in the wire strippers and pulling. Now you can see that I have two wires here. I have the one that came out of the red covering and the one that came out of the black covering. So we want to solder these wires together. So first we are going to twist them. And now we have two separate twisted wires. We have the black wire, we're going to call it, and the red wire. So as we had mentioned and talked about earlier, I'm going to dip these wires in the flux so that the solder will replace the flux. So I'm just going to dip it in like that. You don't need too much on it, just enough to coat it, and clamp it right here. So now we are going to take our solder and our soldering iron and touch the solder to the soldering iron. You'll see a little smoke. It's not a big deal. And you will notice that there is a little silver droplet of solder on my iron, and I am simply going to touch that little silver dot to my wire. Now you'll notice that the black wire has become silver and the red one still has the flux on it. So we want to do that again. And so you'll notice that when you do that, the flux will drip away and melt. Just wipe off the excess flux, and you have a now silver wire that is all ready to go. So some important things to remember about your wire. We don't want a connection between the black wire and the red wire. You can see that mine are separate and not touching. What we do want is the wires within each color to be connected. So all of the wires that came out of the red covering are connected together, and all the ones that came out of the black are connected together. We also want to make sure they look as smooth as possible. If your wire has bubbles on it, what you can do is go back over with your soldering iron, and the heat will make the solder come off, so you can kind of smooth over it, kind of like painting with the soldering iron. So we want smooth wires for them not to be connected. We don't want the black and the red to be connected. And this is a good length to have it at, so we can twist and connect it with other